Safeguarding the Rights of Family Members from Womb to Tomb. This is the title of a regional conference to be held in Tobago by the International Society for Family Life. Convener of the conference is attorney and independent Senator Hazel Thompson, IE. In coming to the issue at hand, the society says as one example that human rights for children are still regarded as an oxymoron 30 years after coming into being the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. It says also that in too many countries, full recognition of women's rights is still an elusive goal. Ms. Thompson IE is an attorney and a mediator, a former director at the Hugh Wooding Law School Legal Aid Clinic, and a course director for family law probate practice and procedure, and a former senior tutor at the Eugene Dupuc Law School in the Bahamas. She's my guest on this edition of 10 Questions. Hazel, good morning.
Good morning, Andy.
Good to see you.
And to see you too, and happy to be there with you and to discuss this very important and timely conference.
All right, thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's to come in December, right? 3 days in December, right?
Yes.
All right. And
it's from the December the 13th to 16, 2022, and it's at Magdalena Grand Golf and Beach Resort in Tobago. And it's the very first time that the International Society of Family Law will be having a conference, any type of conference in this part of the world. It's an international independent scholarly organization, and it's made up of law professors and jurists from more than 50 countries. And our premier event is the World Conference, and between the World Conferences, because we had one in 2017 in Amsterdam, and we were supposed to have one in 2020 in Tobago, and we ended up, in Barbados, and I was organizing that one, and the Jubilee Conference is the one that's coming next in Antwerp, in Belgium. So in between, we have regional conferences, and we've had 2 Caribbean regional conferences before, one in the Bahamas in 2011, and another one again in the Bahamas in 2014. So we're now having it in this part, in the Southern Caribbean, in Tobago, and I'm extremely happy that I am able to bring this conference home.
Yeah. All right. So I want to ask you to begin by talking about going back to what I said in the opening there, that 30 years after this thing became on the agenda at the United Nations, the human rights of children are still regarded as an oxymoron. Let's discuss that a bit, unpack that a bit.
All right. So it's actually now, that was written for the 2020 conference. So it's actually 32 years going on 33. So that we still have a long way to go and in protecting children's rights. A lot has happened. A lot has happened with protection. We've had a lot of new laws, because if we go back to when we had the first juvenile court in 1899, where children were treated just as adults, they could be hanged, they could be sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. So we have come a long way in protecting children. But of course, there are always challenges to be met. And we read in newspapers and we see that, children are at risk in a number of ways. And we have to see what we can do to assist them in this situation.
So what would you say? What would you say are some of the rights that children ought to have that are established by these conventions that are contested? And you say people treat them as though they don't exist.
Everything that we do supposed to be in the best interest of the child. The 4 pillars, non-discrimination, right? So that no child must be discriminated against. And this is a problem we don't always understand. If a child is within the society, that child has to be protected. That child has to get all the rights of a child who's a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. I remember talking to a group of persons. I was teaching a course in child rights. I actually had a conference in child rights. We had it at the law school. And there were a number of teachers and school principals there, and I was going through and I asked them, name some of the rights of the child. And they could only name 2 or 3 and stop. And when I started to expand about the various rights, non-discrimination, and I explained to them that you have children who have been admitted to school, and that child who is from another country you must use the same criteria that you use for a child who is from outside of a jurisdiction. And they will say, but we would get into trouble, if we decide to use the same criteria. The Ministry of National Security tells us, no, you must have the child documented. And I am saying that is not what it is. We must treat the child in the same way. For example, if you have two children who have come to be admitted into primary school, one child is 5 years old, one child is 6 years old. You would want to give, and you have one place, you would want to give the child, normally, who is 6 years old, that place, because the younger child would have another chance. But if you have the child who is 6 years old, and from another jurisdiction, whether it be Venezuela or Grenada or St. Vincent, the same way you would have chosen the older child from your country is the same way, the same thing you have to do. You have to give the child who is the older child from outside the jurisdiction preference over the child who is from Trinidad and Tobago. And they couldn't wrap their minds around that. You know that non-discrimination means that once the child is here, you treat that child as all children are equal.
All right.
Now, the question of, sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, finish the point.
The best interest of the child is another very important pillar of the convention. And the fact is, everything that we do, we must be measured and we must ask, is this in the best interest of the child? The child's right to life, survival, and development, it is wide. And it means that you have to take away a child's health, the child's education, the child's, not being protected from exploitation, all kinds of exploitation. And also one of the things that we aren't always very good at is the question of if the child has suffered harm, that child has to be rehabilitated. That child has to receive all of the resources that you need to bring that child back to normalcy.
All right.
And another one, I just want to say last, is that the child's right to be heard.
Right.
That isn't always honored.
Right, I'm seeing that there, and one question comes to mind from quite apart from what I have in front of me. The question of how is the society's legal system set up such that the violation of these rights of children, and I want to get to the rights of women, how the violation of those rights get to be actionable in court if there is not a sort of companion legal system that recognizes these rights and so on. What are some of the challenges there?
I think the legal system, it does recognize rights. There are laws to protect children. We have Children Act, we have a Children Authority Act, we have, a number of pieces of legislation, Family Law Act, we have Adoption Act, a number of pieces of legislation that recognizes recognize the rights of the child.
That is us here in Trinidad and Tobago. To what extent that is universal, or are there parts of the world where in some cases culture militates against the observance of some of these rights for women and children, and even, I want to get to that if we can, people's rights after the tomb?
One of the things that the former Attorney General, Faris Arari, was very proud of is the fact that he was able to eliminate child marriage. In many parts of the world, there is still that problem of child marriage. This is a topic that's coming up at another conference, the one in Goa, the Commonwealth Law Conference. I'm going to be speaking about that, child marriage. I'm very proud to say that we no longer have child marriage. It's an issue that was raised last year at the conference in Nassau. There are many countries that still have, children going through this genital mutilation. And, you still have a number of barbaric practices that are, against children. So all countries are not created equal. We abolished death penalty for children many, many years ago. So we were ahead of the United States, and I was very proud to say when I was conducting a workshop in the US that we have long done away with death penalty for children. There was a talk some time ago, remember the Chuck Atten case?
Yes.
And the Chief Justice and other people who should know better said that they would like to bring back the Sierra Leone with death penalty. That will be going backwards, and I wrote about it as well. So we are in advance in many things. Even the question of having children in prison or in confinement for many years without possibility of parole. This is something that we must review. We must review the sentences of children. In the United States, all of those things came very late in the day. And there are other countries that you find that children are not protected in that way. And that's why these conferences are so important, because we are able to measure where we're going. We are able to see what other countries have done. And because we discuss it, we have one of the persons who are coming there as one of the featured speakers, Ursula Kelly. And she wrote this International Human Rights. She's the editor of the International Human Rights of Children. And this is a big fat book that tells you all the international rights and what is happening in various parts of the world. You have Lauren Walker. She's another one of my speakers, and she is really phenomenal. She deals a lot with restorative justice and school misbehavior, which is something I've been trying to push in this jurisdiction for some years now. We have a number of people who have been trained in restorative justice, but are they practicing it?
Right. So what you mean is that they ought not to be having sort of chastisement and punishment at the start of addressing misbehavior in schools as it is down here. All right? That's what you're talking about.
Well, we still have, although we speak about not having corporal punishment, we still have corporal punishment in the home. And even though it's been outlawed in the school, you still have cases of corporal punishment in school. And you still have also verbal abuse in the school system. There are children who are being insulted by teachers and school principals, being told all kinds of terrible things. You remember the question about the tranquility rant, where the teacher said a lot of things to the,
Yes.
So it is not an isolated case, because a number of times people write to me, they phone me and tell me this is happening in school. I actually went into a school and the principal denied this was happening. I said, well, you better investigate. This man went to all the trouble to find out where my number was, what my number was, and complained to me. He's not making up something about his 6-year-old child who's fearful of coming to school. So we always have to investigate cases about what is happening on the ground.
All right, so let's talk about women's rights now. In those, let's use, let's say, Afghanistan as a kind of focus point for it, in which the current regime of the Taliban has moved to roll back a lot of rights that had been allowed and gone forward on women. Are they singular in that, or this is a cultural thing that is the case in more than one country, in different parts of the world?
Well, you have a number of countries that are really patriarchal to the extreme. And they really believe that women should be subjugated to the men. So when there was the first World Women Lawyers Conference in London, that was a big issue some years ago. I attended as a guest of the British government, and I really was felt very privileged, and I was amazed to find out what was happening in the Middle East, what was happening in different parts of the world. So although there's a lot of pressure sometimes brought to bear in the international community, things are not moving as quickly as we would like to see happen. The question of domestic violence remains a burning issue in so many countries. And one of the things that Lauren Walker I spoke of before, she is coming to talk about, is how you can actually use restorative practices for domestic violence cases. Because a lot of the European countries, they use family group conferencing. They do not only use the police response, they use the family, because the domestic violence takes place in the family. And they feel that the family should have to take responsibility. And when they have conferencing, they actually not only have the husband and wife, but they have the children as well, The children come in and say, look, this is how I feel when daddy beats mommy, or mommy, is harsh with daddy. And they actually listen to the children and see how this behavior is affecting the children. And sometimes it is in those cases when the fathers and the mothers actually hear the children speak that they decide that some change has got to come. There are many cases of domestic violence where people have a hands-off approach. Yeah. And what ought to happen is that men and women and children must be involved. Even the bosses in the workplaces. Anytime I go to a mass and I hear the priest talk about domestic violence, I make it a point to go and congratulate the priest and ask him to do more of that. Because there are many influencers in the society who ought to do those things, and they stay clear.
All right, I want to come to what I see here as the additional list and some of the stuff that you made available to me here. People have the right to access genetic ancestry. That is a big issue for some people.
Yes, and we know why we are saying that, Andy. And I am very glad to have Alice Diver. She had another paper that she was going to do, but since we postponed this conference because of COVID, she's coming to talk about that. And this is a subject very close to her heart. She teaches in the university in Northern Ireland, Belfast. And I actually attended one of her conferences. And she is an adopted child. And she wanted to know what her rights were to find out who are your parents. Because unless you know who your parents are, you don't know what is your genetic ancestry. You don't know what is in your genes. You don't know, things that have influenced you. So she is advocating a right to access your genetic ancestry. Now, coupled with that, you have the right of the mother's right to the privacy. So we have to have a balancing exercise. Is it that the mother must say, and the mother alone, look, I have this child. I gave up this child for adoption. I want nothing more to do with this child. I'm not going to reveal anything. Because when I gave my consent to adoption, I gave up all my rights. But what about the child? So it will be interesting to have a test case in Trinidad and to actually see, how the courts will decide such an issue.
Yeah, because on the other side, you have the adoptee or the adopting parent then doesn't want to have to reveal the child's birth parents or birth mother, as the case may be. How do we walk that line?
She might have married, and might never have told her husband, look, I had a child before marriage. So this opens up a whole, heap of things now to her. So it's not an easy question, but there is pain on the side of the adoptee, because that child wants to know. I remember somebody contacted me from Tobago, and the person had been in the orphanage in Tagarigua, and I went through all kinds of, things trying to get information from her, and it was like a brick wall. You just couldn't get the information. The proceedings are sealed in the court. There are people who know, who would not reveal. And, sometimes the adoptive mother is fearful that this child would turn to the biological parent and forget her and all that she's done. But that hardly ever happens, and it is a fear that you would need counseling. You need to be explained. Somebody needs to explain to you what is in that child, that deep-seated longing to know who I am. Because who you are must come from your origin, because remember, we are both what is in our genetics and the environment, as well as...
And rightly speaking, that right and the access to the information ought not to be prohibited against. But we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to go into another matter here. I think it's cultural for us in societies like this, rights in cohabitation. But we'll come back with that on the other side. Stay with us. This is 10 Questions.
Hazel? Parents need to know what they're signing up the children for.
Mommy, Daddy, I just wanted to ask. God, is that you? want to do what?
Welcome back to the program. December 13th to 16th at the Magdalena Grand and Beach Resort, the Golf and Beach Resort in Tobago, the International Society for Family Life, a regional conference on safeguarding the human rights of family members from womb to tomb. Our guest, the convener and vice president of that organization, Hazel Thompson, IE, independent senator in the current Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Let's come to the issue now of cohabitation. What are the rights involved there, and how are these things put to the test?
Well, before I speak about that, International Society of Family Law.
It's family law.
Family law, yes, yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And before I forget, Andy, this conference would not have been possible without the assistance of some people. So before I must say that the Tobago Tourism Agency, Alicia Edwards, really has been phenomenal. The Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, I must thank the President, Sophia Chute, the Ministry of Social Development, UB Credit, the Caribbean Court of Justice was on board with us from the very beginning, and I must thank them. We have people from Caribbean Airlines, Ronnie Mohammed, Hayden Newton, and Jason Hadley, Airports Authority. They have really been working because we need to put information on the website. Because I had a lot of fight. People say, I can't get to Tobago, it's so difficult to get to Tobago. I know they have been feeding me information to put on the website about what international airlines fly here, how you get from Trinidad to Tobago. So I must thank that team and the Magdalena Hotel, Onika, Bristol, Solomon, and even some of the lawyers here, they have really been very, very supportive. Ian Benjamin and Ralston Nelson, I'm really very grateful to all of the sponsors who had to come on board because we have to pay for these people to come in and to assist us. Now, I don't know why you're so interested in cohabitation, and I wouldn't ask you why, but we passed that law some time ago, and this is one of the papers that in fact, when we had the conference, the World Conference in Utah, I actually delivered a paper on that, so I had to do that research. Now, one law is very good for certain people because there are many people who have suffered being in cohabitational relationships, living with a man for 20 odd years sometimes. The man dies and the wife grabs everything, although she might even know where he has bank accounts. And the woman who has been taking care and, there by his side and probably has children for him, she was left with nothing. And it's been an area of injustice for years. But then you also have the innocent wife. And I've had to deal with a situation where this woman didn't even know that this man had this other union. Because sometimes the wife is very naive and she doesn't check on the man and what he's doing and where he's going. And then she realized that she has to share this, estate with somebody else. So we've had laws where in one hand, people are protected, and on the other hand, people are not protected. So now you can the law has in the Distribution of Estates Act, not only in the Cohabitation Relationship Act, where you can get maintenance from the spouse that you're living with. You have a child with him, you can get maintenance for the child. And if he dies, you're actually entitled to that estate that he acquired during the time when you all lived together. So before, there was a lot of hurt and, marriages that were dead, were never buried because There are people who would live with a woman for years and they would never marry her. But what our law is different from in different other jurisdictions. We do not say a single man, a single woman. We say a man who has lived with a woman for 5 years. Excuse me, in Jamaica and Barbados, he stipulated a man must be single, a woman must be single. But the odd part about it, Andy, is when you look, and I've written about that, when you look at the National Insurance Act, it's different. It does not mesh with the Cohabitation and Relationship Act, and we ought to fix that. So as we advance, we have to say, well, what are we doing with our laws? Is everybody getting a fair share? So it has worked well for certain people, especially women who have lived, for many years and would have been disadvantaged because the estate would follow the rules of distribution. And it may end up going to the man's parents before his siblings, and the woman with whom he had children would not have shared in the estate. Remember, there was a time where the child born out of wedlock didn't have anything as well, was not entitled. So all of those laws have been improvements in how we treat with children, how we treat with women. But again, we still have some way to go in domestic violence. And that's why I'm so happy with Justice D'Souza's coming here.
You mean in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, we have a distance to go with addressing the rights of people, as you say, in these cases?
Yes. And Trinidad has done some advance, because we just amended, we keep amending our laws. So we are improving all of the time. Yeah. But in terms of who is deemed a person to be protected, when the last time the bill came to Parliament, I was arguing for if you have same-sex couple, all right? Not in all circumstances, they are protected. And we have had cases where men have been killed by their spouses, their male spouses, and perhaps women killed by their spouses as well. And if you are human, by virtue of your humanity, you ought to be protected. It's not because, remember, even when you start to talk about God and morality, the Lord makes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust if you think it's unjust. But why are you to judge? If you have somebody in an area of danger, that person should be protected. That is my view, regardless of whether their moral standing is the same as yours. The laws ought to protect everybody.
Yeah, I think we're coming up on the finishing line of the program, but I just want to mention this, that in my understanding and my experience, a lot of people who suffer disabilities, there's a kind of automatic approach to people who are looking after them, that somehow once you become disabled, you lose your rights. And I'm happy to see that is something here, again, respecting and honoring the rights of people with disabilities. Is that just something?
Yes, and that's a topic that is also going to be addressed by one or two of our speakers. The people with disabilities and also the elderly. The elderly, and I had no idea until we were having our conference in Lyon in France, and I decided to give my paper on the elderly. What was happening in Trinidad and Tobago? Now, at the time I was in the Bahamas, so my daughter had to do research, all newspaper reports about the elderly who had died in fires, who had lost their properties, who had been killed even by their own children. The elderly in this country suffer a lot of abuse. We read in newspaper, and we have not yet put into force our law dealing with people in institution, the senior citizens home. This is since 2007. So I know that Minister Donna Cox has spoken about it, and she's trying to do something, but it is taking too long. I had to go into some homes, and I was amazed. People packed in like sardines. You can't even pass between the beds. Yeah. And it was all because they were getting their old age pension, and the people were bringing the old age pension to the place. Well, I suppose with COVID, all of that went through.
Yeah.
And the people were being treated as animals.
All right,
So we really need to check on that as well.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Hazel Thompson.
There's always so much to say and so little time.
Always, that's how it is. Well, thank you very much, Hazel Thompson, independent.
And I hope you know that the media people will also attend.
Well,
and a number of people will be coming from a number of countries. And we intend to give you the best conference ever. I attended the agriculture fair, and I tasted some of those balls made out of, what was it again? Copper.
Yes,
and I said, I'm ordering a few hundred. It must go in the bags of my conference delegates. They must take back copper balls to their country.
I see what you mean. All right.
Enjoy the ambience of Tobago.
Thank you very much. The International Society for Family Law, this conference on safeguarding the human rights of family members from womb to tomb. Thank you very much. All right, that's been our program. That's 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
3 dimensions and no major loss of life. I would expect that.